My name is Maya Bennett. I'm 25 and I grew up in the shadow of Austin's elite, surrounded by wealth, status, and a life that looked perfect from the outside. My stepfather, George, is a well-known businessman, the type that makes headlines and runs things behind the scenes. My mother, Evelyn, has always been the picture of grace and elegance, a socialite whose life seemed to revolve around charity galas and private events. But while everyone adored them, I always felt like the outsider in my own family. My older brother, Adam, is the one who inherited George's world. Charming, successful, and always the one to say the right things. I've never been like him. I spent my days pushing against the expectations of a life I didn't want. My parents never really understood why I was always the odd one out, why I couldn't find joy in the life they built. I often wondered if they cared at all. Now, on this Mother's Day, I finally asked my mom a question I should have asked years ago. Mom, do you like the $5,000 Dad gives you every month? Her reaction caught me off guard, her hesitation, the way her smile faded, the sudden coldness in her eyes. And when I glanced at George, his face drained of color, as though the room had grown cold. Something wasn't right. Something in that moment shifted everything, and I could feel the foundation of my family cracking beneath my feet. I never thought a simple question would reveal secrets so dark that they might just destroy everything I thought I knew. The weight of the moment hung in the air. My mother's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the glass of wine on the table, avoiding my gaze. George's eyes were fixed on me now, his expression turning to stone, every line of his face tightening as if he'd just realized something he'd hoped to forget. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stepped too far, too fast into something I wasn't supposed to know. Why would you ask that, Maya? Evelyn's voice cracked, her usual composure crumbling at the edges. You know your father does what he can for us. She looked at George, and for the first time I noticed something, an imperceptible exchange between them. Her eyes flickered with something I couldn't place, something like fear, but quickly masked by the smile she forced. I don't mean to make it sound wrong, I said, trying to swallow the rising lump in my throat. I just don't understand why you always look so distant when I ask about it. We've always had everything, haven't we? George shifted in his seat, clearing his throat. He leaned forward, the air thick with tension. Maya, he said in a tone I had never heard from him before. Cold. Calculated. It's a generous gesture. Your father just wants you to know you're taken care of. He paused, letting the words settle in. You need to trust that some things are better left undisturbed. Undisturbed. His choice of words lingered in the room. A warning. I trust you both, I muttered, but even as I said it, a sinking feeling gripped my chest. The silence was broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioner. Then, unexpectedly, my phone buzzed. I picked it up without thinking, then froze. A text message from an unknown number, its contents cryptic. I know what you're asking. It's all a lie. Don't trust them. My pulse quickened. I glanced at George, then at my mother, both of them now looking at me as if they knew I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to. The room felt smaller, as though the walls were closing in on me. Who is that? Evelyn asked, her voice sharp, too sharp. I couldn't respond. I couldn't explain how I felt suddenly, like a cornered animal. My mind raced. What was going on? Why hadn't I noticed these things before? Why hadn't I seen the cracks in our seemingly perfect world? I stood up abruptly, needing space, needing to think. I'll be outside for a minute, I said, my voice unsteady. I didn't wait for a response. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I felt the weight of my question hanging between us, between me and everything I thought I knew. But something else was wrong. I wasn't alone. I turned quickly, feeling the presence behind me before I saw the shadow. There was someone standing at the edge of the yard watching. Who's there? I called out, my voice trembling with the realization that I wasn't the only one searching for answers tonight. No answer. Just the rustling of the wind through the trees, the faintest shift in the shadows. And then, click, a phone camera shutter. "Get inside, Maya!" George's voice came from behind me. Now. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I didn't move. Something was happening. Something far darker than I was prepared for. I heard a door slam inside the house. My mother calling my name. But I stayed. In that moment, I realized that I was no longer just asking questions. I was stepping into a game I didn't understand, where the stakes were far higher than I ever could have imagined. And I hadn't even begun to uncover the truth. But I would. The tension in the air was unbearable. I stood frozen, staring at the shadow in the yard. I'd felt watched before, but now it was different, cold, suffocating. I didn't turn to face George or Evelyn. I couldn't. I was already too far in. And something about this night felt off, like the pieces of a puzzle I'd never been given were starting to fall into place. I glanced down at my phone, the screen glaring back at me, still showing the cryptic message. "I know what you're asking. It's all a lie. Don't trust them. Don't trust them." The words echoed in my mind as if they had a life of their own, slowly unspooling the knot of unease in my stomach. I wanted to call back, to demand answers from whoever was behind the text, but the coldness of the yard, the shadows shifting around me, kept me rooted in place. I turned around, forcing myself to act casual, as if everything was fine. But George's face had lost its usual facade of calm. His jaw was clenched, and his knuckles were white against the arm of the chair. Evelyn, on the other hand, was trying too hard to keep up the image of serene composure, though her eyes flickered with a fear that didn't match her smile. "Everything all right, Maya?" Evelyn's voice had an edge to it now, something sharp, trying to cover the cracks in her voice. I didn't trust myself to speak. Instead, I reached for the door handle, stepping inside the house without looking back. "I just need some air," I mumbled, hoping it sounded more convincing than I felt. As I closed the door behind me, the first thing I saw was Adam. He was standing at the kitchen counter, sipping from a coffee mug, his back turned to me. His posture was stiff, like someone waiting for a punchline to land. Still no word from Rachel. I asked, trying to break the ice, but he didn't even flinch. "No," he muttered, almost too low for me to hear. "She'll show up eventually." Adam was good at hiding his emotions, but I knew him too well. There was something in his voice, something too sharp. Just then, my phone buzzed again, this time with a call. I didn't recognize the number. I let it ring 3 times before swiping the screen to answer. "Hello." "Maya, it's Nolan," came the voice on the other end, cold and distant. Nolan was a friend of Adam's. He was also one of George's top associates, a man whose name carried weight in the business world. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise at the mention of his name. "Nolan? What's going on?" "Listen," he said, his voice suddenly lowering, as if he didn't want anyone else to hear. "I'm not sure who you've been talking to, but I'm just going to say it. Your father's finances, they're not what you think they are, and it's only a matter of time before everything falls apart." I froze, trying to process the words. "What are you talking about?" "There's more going on here than you know," Nolan continued, his voice now colder, more urgent. "I can't say more over the phone, but just be careful." The line went dead. I stared at the screen, now blank, my heart racing. The room felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Something dark was unfolding, and I was standing right in the middle of it. I looked over at Adam, who was still standing by the counter, his expression unreadable. His eyes briefly met mine, and there was something in them, something distant. "Adam," I said, my voice sharp, "what's really going on?" He took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair. "You've already asked too many questions, Maya. Some things are better left alone." "Who's hiding something, Adam?" I demanded. My voice was growing louder now, echoing in the empty space. "Is it you? Or is it George?" His eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing his face before he quickly masked it. "You need to stay out of this." He stepped forward, his presence suddenly looming. "If you don't, you might not like what you find." His words hit me like a slap. He was scared. He knew something I didn't. I stepped back, breathless. The air in the house had gone thick with secrets, and I didn't know if I could trust anyone anymore. Not even Adam. "I don't care what it takes. I'm going to find out the truth," I said, my voice steady, but with a quiet fury building inside me. I walked out of the kitchen, the weight of his words following me. This wasn't just about money or a simple misunderstanding. It was something bigger, something dangerous. I didn't know it yet, but I was being watched. The shadows in the corner of the living room shifted again. This time, it wasn't just my imagination. The eyes following me were real, and they weren't friendly. I couldn't see who they belonged to, but I could feel their presence, like a pressure tightening around me. I grabbed my jacket and walked out the door, my heart pounding. The night air was cold against my skin, but it didn't matter. My mind was spinning with too many questions, too many lies. And then I saw it. A car parked across the street, its headlights dimmed, but I knew someone was sitting inside. I didn't have to think twice. I ran. I wasn't sure who I was running from or why, but something told me this was only the beginning of a much bigger story, one I wasn't prepared for. I didn't stop until I reached the old library, a quiet corner where I knew I could think. But as I stepped inside, the door creaked shut behind me, and I wasn't alone anymore. The sound of footsteps echoed behind me as I stepped deeper into the library. My breath hitched, the sudden silence almost suffocating. I turned around, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. No one was there, but I wasn't alone. I could feel their eyes on me, even if I couldn't see them. The eerie feeling of being watched crept over me again. The message from Nolan was still fresh in my mind. "It's all a lie," he had said, but I wasn't sure what part of it was a lie. I had to make sense of it. First, I moved quickly through the rows of dusty bookshelves, my hand brushing against the spines, eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. The library was silent except for the soft creak of the wooden floorboards under my feet. But that wasn't the silence that made my heart race. It was the feeling of being stalked, hunted. I reached the back of the library and pulled out the drawer of a filing cabinet. Inside were folders, papers, and old records. My fingers trembled as I sifted through the clutter, desperate for something, anything, to help me make sense of the situation. Then I found it. A folder labeled in bold black ink. Property transfer documents confidential. I felt the blood rush from my head as I opened it. The contents were a mixture of legalese and signatures, but one document caught my eye, a notarized transfer of assets. The assets belonging to my father had been transferred to an account with a name I didn't recognize. There was a note at the bottom. The signature, clean and official, had been verified by a lawyer from George's law firm, but the name listed as the recipient, Evelyn, my stepmother. I felt a wave of nausea sweep over me. There was no way this could be a mistake. My father had never spoken about these changes. If anything, he had always insisted that everything would be passed to me one day, that it was my inheritance, my future. Why didn't he tell me? I whispered to myself, staring at the paper, unable to look away. Suddenly, I heard the creak of the front door. I slammed the file shut and quickly shoved it back into the drawer. My pulse quickened. Someone was here. I stepped cautiously toward the doorway, but before I could make a move, the figure emerged from the shadows. It was Adam. His face was tense, his eyes darting around the room as though he was trying to track something. "Maya," he said, his voice low and measured. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I snapped, taking a step back, keeping the distance between us. "Don't pretend you don't know what's going on." Adam's lips tightened and he swallowed hard. "This isn't the place for this. Not here." I felt a surge of anger rise within me. "No, you don't get to control this anymore. I know about the transfer, Adam. Why didn't you tell me? His gaze dropped to the floor, avoiding my eyes. I could see the sweat on his brow, the twitch in his hands. The weight of his guilt hung heavy in the air. Listen, Maya, he began, but his words died in his throat. What did you do, Adam? I demanded, my voice shaking with a mix of rage and fear. What's going on? Why is my father's money suddenly in Evelyn's name? Adam looked up at me, his face pale. The silence between us was thick, almost suffocating. And then he spoke, but it wasn't what I expected. You don't know everything, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn isn't who you think she is. I blinked, trying to process his words. What are you talking about? He glanced around the room nervously, as if he were afraid someone was listening. You've got to stop looking into this, Maya. There are things going on that you don't want to get involved in. I stepped closer, my voice firm. No, I need to know what's happening. I need to know why I'm being kept in the dark. Is this about the money? What else is Evelyn hiding? Adam's jaw clenched. You won't believe me if I tell you, but if you keep digging, you're going to regret it. I shook my head, my mind spinning with questions. I felt a mixture of disbelief and dread curling inside me. What are you not telling me? Before he could answer, the sound of a car engine outside broke the tension. The headlights illuminated the front windows, casting a long shadow across the floor. It's him, Adam muttered, his voice tense. He turned toward the door. We need to go now. Who? I asked, but Adam was already halfway out of the room, heading toward the back door. I hesitated for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. My mind screamed at me to leave, to stop chasing these secrets, but my feet were already moving. I followed him into the darkened hall, my heart pounding. As we reached the back door, I heard the voice, cold, steady, and unmistakable. Where do you think you're going, Adam? It was George. Adam Froze. Don't lie to me, George interrupted, stepping out of the shadows. I've been watching you. I felt my breath catch in my throat. The door slammed shut behind us, trapping us inside. Enough games, George said, his eyes narrowing. It's time you found out the truth. And in that moment, everything shifted. The truth wasn't just a matter of money anymore. It was about power and how far they would go to keep it. The tension in the air was suffocating, and I had no idea how much more I would lose before I finally understood everything. I tried to steady my breathing as I sat at the kitchen table, the harsh overhead light casting long shadows across the room. The silence was deafening, every tick of the clock echoing in my mind. My fingers drummed against the table, the surface worn from years of use. I hadn't seen George like that before, eyes filled with something darker than I could have imagined. Stop looking into things, Maya. You don't want to find out the truth. Those words rang in my ears. The tension was palpable. I knew George wasn't just trying to protect me. He was trying to protect something far more valuable to him. But what? I rubbed my temples, trying to clear my thoughts. The file I had found in the library kept coming back to me. The transfer of assets, the notarized documents, Evelyn's name as the sole beneficiary. How long had they been planning this? It was all so clean, so official. It didn't add up. And yet, there I was, with nothing but pieces of a puzzle, trying to put it together. Every moment spent in this house felt like a ticking time bomb, and the walls themselves seemed to close in on me. Focus, I muttered to myself. I had to focus. My phone buzzed on the table, breaking the silence. I jumped, heart racing. It was a text from Nolan. Meeting at 8. Don't trust George. He's hiding something big. My pulse quickened. Nolan had always been the rational one, the one who believed in following the law, even when the law was corrupted. His warning sent a chill down my spine. What had George done that was so dangerous? I glanced at the clock. It was already past 7. I had an hour. Without thinking, I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. The world outside was dark and cold, the wind biting as I stepped into the night. The air felt heavy, as though something unseen was lingering just beyond the corner, watching, waiting. As I walked down the street, toward the car, I noticed a shadow moving in the distance. I stopped in my tracks. My breath caught. It was too far away to make out clearly, but I could feel the weight of its presence. I stepped forward cautiously, my body tense. I couldn't afford to be paranoid, not now. But the sensation of being watched wouldn't leave me. The car door creaked as I slid in, quickly locking the doors. I started the engine and drove off, trying to shake the feeling of being followed. The headlights of my car cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty road ahead. As I neared the restaurant where Nolan had texted me to meet, a sudden thought hit me. What if he had been wrong? What if I was just imagining things? Could George really be hiding something that dangerous? Or was it just a matter of greed? I parked the car in the lot and sat for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel. No, y whisperat. There's something bigger here. Something I'm missing. The door to the restaurant opened just as I stepped out of the car. Nolan was standing there, his figure tall and composed under the warm light spilling from the entrance. Come inside, he said, his voice low, almost guarded. We need to talk. I followed him in, the heavy door swinging shut behind me with a muffled thud. The warmth of the restaurant hit me, but I felt no comfort. Every inch of my skin was alive with tension. We sat down at a table in the back, the dim lighting adding to the intensity of the moment. Nolan leaned forward, his eyes scanning the room before focusing on me. You know I wouldn't lie to you, he began, his tone deliberate. George and Evelyn are more dangerous than you think. I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Nolan hesitated, taking a deep breath. There's more than just money at stake here. George is involved in something that goes far beyond inheritance. He's connected with people who don't play by the rules. People who would do anything to protect what they've built. My stomach twisted. The words, people who don't play by the rules, sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't just about a family betrayal anymore. It was something far more sinister. Nolan, what exactly are you saying? I asked, my voice shaking. He hesitated, glancing around again, his eyes narrowing as if searching for someone. There are accounts, hidden accounts, a web of illegal transactions that lead straight back to George. But it's not just about money. It's about power, influence, blackmail. I froze. The word blackmail echoed in my head. What kind of power? Nolan's eyes hardened. I don't know all the details, but I've seen the files. They're connected to people in high places. If we expose this, it won't just be George who comes after us. It's bigger than that. My mind raced. I could feel the walls closing in again, the weight of everything I had learned crashing down on me. My breath quickened. I glanced around the restaurant, looking for any signs that we weren't alone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The feeling of being watched had returned, stronger this time. And then, just as I was about to ask another question, a figure stepped into view. Someone I didn't recognize. A man in a suit, tall and imposing. He stood in the doorway for a moment, his eyes scanning the room. His gaze landed on us. And in that moment, I knew we weren't alone. Nolan's face went pale. His voice dropped to a whisper. We need to go. Now. Without another word, he grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the back door. But as we stepped outside, I saw him. George. He was standing across the parking lot, watching us. I stopped. My heart pounded in my chest. You shouldn't have come, Maya. George's voice echoed in the night air. You're too late to stop it now. The air grew thick with tension. Everything I thought I knew had just been ripped away. And in that moment, I realized one thing for sure. The game had just changed. I barely had time to process the weight of George's words before I saw him step forward, his face grim and cold. The air around us crackled with an intensity one couldn't shake. I should have been prepared for this moment. I should have seen it coming. But how could I have ever known that everything I thought I knew would collapse so quickly? You're too late, Maya. George's voice cut through the tension, icy and unyielding. You can't stop what's coming. I felt a wave of heat rise in my chest. Anger, fear, disbelief, all churning together. This was no longer just about my family. This was about power, manipulation, and lies buried deep within every decision George had ever made. And Evelyn, she was a part of this too. I glanced at Nolan, who stood frozen beside me. His eyes darted from George to the dark street behind us, clearly unsettled. We need to move, he said quietly, his tone sharp, as if someone might be listening. But before I could make a move, I saw a glint in the distance. A car's headlights, the hum of an engine. They were coming closer. Nolan grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the alley behind the restaurant. Not here, he hissed. We can't risk being seen. Not now. I didn't argue. My heart pounded in my chest as we slipped into the alley, the cold night air stinging my skin. The sound of the engine grew louder, and then silence. The car had stopped. My breath caught in my throat. Who is it? I whispered, but Nolan didn't answer. He was already pulling me further into the shadows. A few minutes passed in strained silence before Nolan finally spoke again. It's worse than I thought. There's a lot more at play here than just George and Evelyn. I frowned, my mind spinning. What are you talking about? He pulled out a folder from his jacket, flipping it open. Inside were documents, contracts, wire transfers, and a list of names that made my stomach drop. Look at this, Nolan said, pointing to the page. These names, they're not just some clients. They're tied to people in high places, people who will stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. The words echoed in my mind. High places, secrets buried. What does this mean? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though my hands trembled as I turned the pages. It means George and Evelyn aren't just trying to manipulate your family. They're being controlled. And these are the people who are pulling the strings. I felt the ground shift beneath me. The world around me seemed to blur, a surreal fog wrapping itself around my mind. How far did this go? The streetlights flickered as a figure appeared at the end of the alley. My heart lurched. Was it them? Had they followed us? Nolan stiffened, his eyes narrowing. Stay here, he whispered. Don't move. I'll handle this. Before I could react, he stepped into the shadows, leaving me in the suffocating dark, alone with my thoughts. I took a deep breath, willing my mind to focus. What had George meant by too late? What had Evelyn gotten herself into? And most importantly, how could I get out of this? Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the sound of footsteps behind me. My pulse surged. I turned quickly, expecting Nolan, but it wasn't him. A man in a suit stood there, his face obscured by shadows. He was tall, his posture straight, his movements deliberate. Maya, he said, his voice low and smooth, sending a chill down my spine. We need to talk. I didn't speak, didn't move. He took a step forward, but I stayed rooted to the spot, the fear creeping up my spine. I'm not here to hurt you, he continued, as though reading my mind. But if you want to save your family, you'll listen. I swallowed hard, every muscle in my body tensed, ready to spring into action. I had no idea who this man was, but I knew this wasn't a random encounter. What do you want? I managed to say, my voice shaky. The man studied me for a long moment, his eyes dark and calculating. I'm here to help you, Maya. But you need to understand something. What you think you know about George and Evelyn, it's just the tip of the iceberg. My head swam with confusion. What are you talking about? Who are you? He stepped closer, his voice dropping lower. You're in way over your head. If you want to walk away from this, you'll have to make some hard choices. Trust no one. Not even Nolan. The words hit me like a punch. Trust no one? Not even Nolan? I couldn't believe it. Nolan had been my ally through all of this. He had to be. He had to be the one I could trust. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the thought. I don't understand, I whispered. What are you saying? The man leaned in, his voice like gravel. It's too late for George, but it's not too late for you. He turned, motioning to the darkened street. The people you're dealing with. They won't stop. Not until everything you care about is gone. The man turned to leave, but before he did, he added, Be careful, Maya. The walls are closing in. As the figure disappeared into the night, I felt the weight of his words settle over me. A pit formed in my stomach, and my breath caught in my throat. There was no escaping this. No turning back. The stakes were higher than I ever imagined, and I had no choice but to dive deeper. As I turned to follow Nolan into the shadows, one thing became clear. The truth was no longer my ally. It was my enemy, and the game was about to get a lot darker. I stood there, looking at the room that had once felt like a sanctuary. The old oak desk in the corner, where my father had sat for years, the leather chair now vacant, the walls that had once held the family's achievements. Everything felt so distant, so foreign. The truth had broken through every piece of my life, unraveling it at a pace I couldn't control. The lies, the schemes, the family that I thought I knew, it was all a facade, a house of cards, and I was watching it crumble in front of me. George was gone. Evelyn was gone. They had run. Their disappearances so swift, so calculated, but they hadn't taken the secrets with them. No, those had been left behind, scattered across a web of twisted lies. And now I had to decide what came next. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about justice either, not in the way I'd first imagined. What I had thought would be a triumphant end to this ordeal, the kind of conclusion that would restore order, was nothing more than the beginning of a deeper realization. The truth wasn't a weapon to wield. It was a burden that had to be carried whether I liked it or not. You can't change what's been done, Maya. Nolan's voice broke the silence. He stood at the doorway, his face tired, his eyes shadowed with the weight of everything we'd discovered. But you can decide how to move forward. I didn't look at him. The anger, the pain, everything I had held inside for so long felt like a storm inside of me, threatening to explode. But somewhere deep down, I knew that no amount of anger would ever give me back what I had lost. All those years, I muttered, more to myself than to Nolan. The lies, the manipulation, they were just the start of a bigger game. Nolan stepped inside, closing the door behind him. You can't fix the past, Maya, but you can shape the future. He was right. There had been moments, so many moments, when I could have walked away from the truth, when I could have ignored the signs. But I hadn't. I had dug deeper. I had uncovered what was buried. Now I had to live with it. The truth wasn't something you could simply bury no matter how much you wanted to. It followed you, haunted you, until you faced it head on. I moved to the desk and opened the drawer, the one my father had kept locked for years. Inside were papers, documents that had once seemed insignificant, but now they were the key to understanding everything. As I skimmed through them, the pieces clicked together. The signatures, the names, the dates, it was all there. The corruption, the power plays, the manipulation. But it wasn't just George and Evelyn. It ran deeper than that. There was a name, one I hadn't expected, my own. I dropped the papers in shock, the realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. I was part of this too, wasn't I? I whispered, my voice barely audible. Nolan didn't answer at first. He stepped closer, his hand resting on my shoulder, offering silent support that I didn't know I needed. You didn't know, Maya. You were a pawn, and now you have a choice. You can make sure no one else is used the way you were. You can stop this. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My entire life, everything I had built had been based on lies, and now I had the power to end it. But there was still a question lingering, one that had been gnawing at me since the beginning. What would it cost me to stop it all? My phone buzzed on the desk, snapping me out of my thoughts. I reached for it, my fingers shaking. The message was short, but the impact was immediate. It's time. You know what you need to do. Meet us at the docks. The air in the room seemed to thicken as I stared at the screen. I had been waiting for this moment. The moment where everything would come to a head. But I didn't know if I was ready for what came next. I looked at Nolan, his face unreadable. "They're not done with me yet," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "You don't have to do this," he said softly, but there was something in his eyes, something I couldn't quite place. He wasn't telling me to stop. He was telling me to be careful. "I know," I said, my voice quieter now but resolute. "But if I don't do this now, it will never end. Not for me and not for anyone else." The silence between us was thick, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Nolan nodded, as though he understood something I hadn't said aloud. He walked to the door. "I'll be right behind you." I hesitated. My entire life had led me to this moment. The truth had torn through every illusion, every connection I had once held dear, and now it was the only thing left standing. But it wasn't just the truth anymore. It was a reckoning. The decision I was about to make wouldn't bring back what I had lost. It wouldn't fix the years of deception, but it would give me something more, something no one could ever take from me again. "Let's go," I said, turning towards the door. "I've come this far. I might as well finish it." As we walked out of the room and into the night, I knew the stakes were higher than they had ever been. I had no idea what awaited me at the docks, but I did know one thing. This was my final choice. To confront the truth, to stop the cycle of lies, and maybe, just maybe, to save whatever remained of my broken family. There was no turning back now.